The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to today's webinar, Lean in the Lab Problem Solving. My name is Sarah and I'll be facilitating the webinar. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. First, this webinar is NBC approved for one regulatory credit. You'll receive an email within 24 to 48 hours after the webinar on how to obtain your credit. All of our webinars are recorded and available online at whitmix.com, and this webinar will be available in about 5 to 7 days. Finally, if you have any questions, please type them in the questions box, which is located on the right-hand side of your screen. We will answer all questions at the end of the webinar. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Brian Knopf. Brian has over 20 years' experience in process control and improvement and has led continuous improvement initiatives in aerospace and dental industries. Brian has a bachelor's degree of science in chemistry and a master's degree in business administration. He is currently vice president of technical services at Whitmix, where he oversees research and development, engineering, and quality control. Brian?
Yes.
If you want to go ahead and start the presentation.
Very good. Okay, as soon as this behaves. Here we go. Okay, welcome. As Sarah said, my name is Brian Knopf. I'm VP of Technical Services. And at Whitmix, that means I get to direct our research and development, our engineering, and our quality assurance activities. So with that, my background, I'll hit that in just a second. So anyway, our agenda today is we're going to address lean in the lab problem solving, focusing on a tool and a concept based on PlanDoCheckAct. Okay, this is a concept that's been around for forever, really. It's something that's simple to do, and hopefully you'll see as we go through this that we'll provide the tools that you can use this to both solve problems and make improvements, but also if you want to implement something new or different, you can also use the same concept. So what I'm going to do today is we'll have our agenda is a brief introduction, what experience I have that helps contribute to this. I'm going to spend a little time talking about improvement infrastructure. And one of the key lessons I hope you get is that problems don't solve themselves. Things don't just happen on their own. You really need the support and infrastructure in the organization to really make this work. And then we'll go into the PlanDoCheckAct concept, and we'll look how we can use this for problem solving and for project implementation. Then we'll have our wrap-up and our question and answer session. All right, so why are you listening to this seminar? Well, it could be because you've been part of the Lean in the Lab series, and this is another one, and you just want to see what it's about. Or it may be that you're really experiencing some issues or problems in your workplace, such as you're finding it's harder to compete. Other labs, they're dropping their pricing. Profits are shrinking. Businesses are expecting faster turnaround. What may have been okay in a week or so, now they want 3 or 4 days turnaround on their cases. Their quality expectations are getting tougher and tougher. They send you the same crappy impressions, but they want better work. They expect everything to be just perfect. Or it's internal issues such as remakes. Wow, we're getting more and more. We have problems. We fix them, but they don't stay fixed. Let's see. Life used to be simple, but now I spend all my day fighting fires. And let's see. Another reason you may be listening is I know I have problems and issues, but I don't know where to start. And that's if you really engage lean and using the system, then you should be identifying problems and problem areas. And it is tough. How do you go about solving problems? How do you go about fixing problems? And what we're going to talk today about is a process that really will take you through that. So I'm sure your world is changing greatly. I'm assuming that most of you are a dental lab, and so for you there's offshore that you're competing with. There's a CAD/CAM. The world is changing, and so if we look at the slide in front of you, you've got this rapidly changing world. As I mentioned, your customer requirements, their expectations are changing, and with that, how do you address that? And so we think if you have a good continuous improvement system in place, that will enable you to address the changes that are happening in the market or maybe happening in your lab. And so really what our continuous improvement is in the yellow there is a system of practices, tools, and training methods to create higher quality products and services. So that's what we really engage in at Whitmix, and so I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. Now, I'd mentioned my background, as Sarah said, I had spent time in aerospace. I started out as a chemist, so I've been a lab person really most of my life, but I did a stint in aerospace before joining Whitmix. My last position there was in process control. This is back in Portland, Oregon. We had 3 plants, and our key products were the hot section components for a jet engine, but it was based on the lost wax process. So for you guys, you picture a coat bearer, maybe a bridge is something fairly large. Well, for us, something large was about a 6-foot diameter radio component made out of titanium or high alloy nickel that went in the hot section of a jet engine. But it was still based on the lost wax process. We made our wax, we made a wax pattern, we invested that wax pattern, cast it, and did a lot of rework. But in that, I ended up helping to implement process control. We had 3 plants that worked 24/7, so I really, myself and my team, we got into every department, on every shift, in every plant, and really worked with the folks on how do we get waste out of our system. And this was the chief tool that we used. And so one of the notes I want to make is, though I learned this technique in aerospace, it's not rocket science, okay? What I hope to show you that is that it really, the concept anyway, is pretty straightforward and pretty simple. And actually, we're going to see it's something that we use a lot. Now, when I'm talking about, back to our slide here, talking about continuous improvement, as I said, it doesn't just happen. You need an infrastructure in place. And just to show you, here are some of the things that we do at Whitmix in order to ensure that we're focused on our customers and that we're constantly looking at how to make improvements throughout Whitmix that satisfy you and actually satisfy the needs of the company. So as you can see there, we've got a bunch of different things. We have our company goals, we have company meetings, benchmarking, net promoter score, all these different things that we think are important to help us be successful. And it was a few years back, we looked at this and said, wow, what a mess. How did, is everything tied together? Are we working this efficiently? Because there was some questions at one point, why do we do all these different things? And we actually, one of the tenets you're going to see is that it's okay to learn from others. And we were at a seminar, and somebody showed us a way of putting this all together that, wow, it all of a sudden started making sense. So this is our model, really this is our model for business excellence. And so today I want to review this because this really provides the infrastructure for us for ensuring that we have continuous improvement throughout our organization. Now first I want to focus on leadership. It really is the heart of our system. And the reason I want to focus on leadership is because, and I'm part of our leadership team here, is really no improvement, no real change will happen if we don't support it, if we don't lead it, if we don't create the vision and the energy behind it to make it happen. And I may hit on this again as we go through, that leadership is just key in this happening, and especially if you're early on your continuous improvement or your lean journey, that as a leader you may have to get out there and get your hands dirty, so to say, to really make sure things happen throughout your organization. Just having a bunch of really good people is great, but it's not enough. Unless you provide the leadership and the direction, their talents may be wasted. So for us, the leaders are responsible for the success of the company, or making sure that we pave the way for success at the company. How's that? The other I want to talk about is focus on the customer. Very key. You're our customer. And so we're really trying to do our best to understand your world, your life, your issues, your problems, and where your world's going. You know, what are the changes that are going to be facing you, so that we can help you and we can be part of that. That's what's going to help drive reinventing WhipMix, so that we'll have new products, new offerings that meet your needs as your world changes. The other one I want to jump to here is mutual learning. And I referenced before that we're open to learning from anybody, and we are. We do that a lot. An example would be that we recently set up an idea suggestion system, and this is just an example of really how we treat almost any initiative. Is the first thing we did is look at research, and we got a really good book on the topic called Ideas Are Free. But we found a company that had been noted for their idea suggestion system, and we went out and toured them, visited them, and we noted what we liked, what we didn't like, and came back and we said, well, what would work for us? We developed our system. We rolled that out earlier this year. But a key part was learning from others, and so we're always open to that, and I suggest you do the same if that isn't part of your habits now. The other I would like to talk about is continuous improvement, and that's really where our focus is going to be today, and specifically what I'll call the 7-step solver and the 9-step do it. These are our improvement tools. These are this one, the 7-step solver is our problem solution tool, and the 9-step do it is our tool for implementing activities and action items. I keep losing my. There we go. And but before I jump into that, I want to talk a little bit about total participation. Different companies have different feelings on that. We at WhipMix, we try and engage everybody. So from the time that I joined WhipMix 18 plus years ago, they actually had team training in place, and with that, we taught tools on how to do problem solving. So the tools that I'm teaching you, we've been teaching here for, oh gosh, over 20 years. And so I've really been involved in this from my previous experience in aerospace and here at WhipMix on the tools that I'm going to be talking about through our team training and our employee involvement system. Now, a lot of companies on total participation, they don't see the value in involving everybody. I'll let you know that up front. A lot of people feel that, especially in your case, the folks working on the bench, they're too valuable working on the bench than helping solve problems. And that's your choice and that's your perspective. But keep in mind that they've got a wealth of information and knowledge that you may be losing if you don't tap into that. But we, and an example, if you look at this improvement teams, this is one a tip of the iceberg activity that we have for continuous improvement at WhipMix. So every year we identify, here are key problems we want to work on, and this is where we put a formal team together, usually 4 to 5 people maybe, that are going to work on an improvement project. And on these teams, we actually measure the results of their success. Now, we do a lot of other improvement activities throughout the company, but we don't capture the benefit as precisely as we do here. But what I want to show you is, why are we doing all this? Well, this is just one example of the benefits of continuous improvement and going after waste throughout your organization. And this is a cumulative savings over the last 10 years. And as you can see, we're almost at $1.2 million cumulative savings. So roughly around $100,000 or so dollars a year in waste that we've taken out of our organization just from this one activity. Just from these improvement teams, we've seen that level of benefit. And this is, again, just the very tip of the iceberg. So there's true value in implementing continuous improvement throughout your organization and using these tools to go after waste or go after what's affecting you in the marketplace or what's affecting your customer satisfaction. It's a valuable tool to help you. And I'm sure you, like us, you're not doing this just for the fun of it or just because it sounds good. You're doing it because you really have, you want to succeed. And these tools can help you do that. Okay, so we're going to talk about PlanDoCheckAct. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with this concept, but it's something that you do all the time or have done all the time. And the first example I want to throw out is think of working at the bench. Or if you haven't worked at the bench, if you're not a ceramicist or a metal finisher, or you haven't really had any activity there, then think of something some activity or a hobby that you've done by hand. But I'll drop back to working at the bench. So picture you've got a case. The first thing you're going to do is look at it, probably look at the prescription, trying to understand what exactly do I need to do here. You're doing some level of planning. What do I need to do here? How am I going to do that? And then you do something. So if it's metal finishing, you may start the grinding. If you're a ceramicist, you'll start building it. You're picking your ceramics, your colors, etc., and you'll start building it. And as you do that, you're constantly checking to see how you're doing. So you look at it, you devise, here's what my approach, here's what I'm going to do. You do something, and then you check it. You look at it, okay, is that right? Do I have my fit? Do I have my color right? Am I getting my contours? All right? And then based on what we see there, we react. Oops, no, I overdid it. I've got to grind off a little bit here, or no, I still need to do more. So thinking of at that level where you're actually doing handwork is you go through this. You look at it, you make up a plan, probably even subconsciously. You do something, you check it, make sure it's right, and then you act on that. Either you go further or you go back and fix something. Okay, so that's the general idea. I guess another example I'd like to throw out of PDCA is if you go to the doctor. And if you go to the doctor and you say, doctor, I'm not feeling well, I've got this pain, he's going to start asking you questions because he's going to try and put together a plan. And he'll try and understand what the pain is, where you feel the pain, how long you've had it, maybe where you could have gotten it from, and then he may do testing. He may look at, okay, well, we need to get some data. I need to run some blood work, or we need an MRI, or whatever testing that he thinks is appropriate, so that he can really understand what the problem is, and most importantly, the cause of the problem, because it's really going to be hard to treat you until the doctor really understands the root cause of the problem. All right? So once he feels he does, he's going to come up with a treatment plan, and you'll work through that, and then he's going to be checking with you on, are you getting better? Are you getting better? Are you getting better? If you are, then great, you continue with the treatment plan. If not, you may go through another round of testing. Okay? Well, that's what PDCA is. That's what he's doing. He's based on what you're saying, he's coming up with his plan to identify the root cause, treat that, and then make sure his treatment was effective. Now, the reality is most of us, hopefully you recognize that when I gave the example of working on something by hand, that yes, that's obvious. You do something, you check it, you do something, you check it. But for whatever reason, as we step away from the bench, as we step away from doing things by hand, or we step away from that direct involvement, we start losing that concept of PDCA. And I guess it's because there's just a couple layers there, but we no longer really get in and try and understand the problem. And what happens is we become like the doctor that you go in and you talk to him and you say, I have a pain, and he says, well, take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning. Well, that's not what we want, but how often do we do that in our workplace when a problem pops up? How often does somebody walks in and they say, hey, there's a problem here, and we give them some, weak response equivalent to the take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning because we don't want to deal with it. Well, the reality is it's not going to go away. It's not going to get fixed unless we do deal with it. And I think we owe our workplace what we expect from the doctor, and that is to pay attention and really take things seriously and really get in and try and solve something. And so we're going to do that using this tool called the 7-Step Solver. And it has 7 steps there. Under the plan section, we're going to select a theme. We're going to collect data. We're going to analyze that data and try and identify what is the root cause. Under the do, we're going to come up with our plan and roll out an implementation. Under the check, we're We're going to look at how do we evaluate the effects of our improvement. What we did, did we do the right thing? And then we're going to act on that data with standardize and reflect on process. Okay, so just take a moment here and think about how do you identify problems to work on. Oh, excuse me. Let me back up. Sorry, got ahead of myself here. So how do you identify problems to work on? So in your place, is it mostly firefighting? Something pops up, or do you do anything that's out there, not reactive? And so examples of ideas, or where we get ideas at Whitmix, are from our company goals and objectives. So every year we come up with our company goals, and a lot of the projects here are what we feed into our improvement teams and get them focused on for the year. Other sources of problems are performance metrics. And just a note here on metrics. Most companies measure their financial performance, but are you measuring other indicators of performance like rework, any other measures of waste throughout your organization? Because there's a saying that you can't manage what you don't measure, and I really believe that. And we're going to see as we go through here that measurement is a very key thing. We've got to figure out how to measure things. But this is back on your business. How do you measure your business's success? And so oftentimes we'll look at this. If we're not performing in an area that we think we should, then that may be cause for an improvement activity. Other lean objectives. We've been in the lean for a good 10+ years now, and that's provided all sorts of opportunities for improvement, helped us identify a lot of problems throughout the organization. Value stream mapping, if you're that far in your lean journey, that's a very good tool to help identify waste and non-value added activities through your organization. And again, any of these that I've mentioned so far, you can apply the improvement tools we're talking about. Customer complaints, that's a key one for us as well. And then suggestion system, which that's relatively new for us, but now we have a system where we're tapping into the people on a day-to-day basis. What are the issues? What are the problems? What are the headaches that you're experiencing that we can work on? So that's also fuel for our continuous improvement activities. Okay, so step one. Now we've from the previous. Let me back up just a second. We've identified a problem. We have a problem area. The first thing we want to do is come up with a theme. And so for example, one of the issues you're a dental lab, and one of the issues is the cycle time. And your doctors, they want you to cut your cycle down significantly because they can get their cases in just a couple days from other labs. And so you've gone through and you've mapped your different processes, and you've identified that, hey, we want to really focus on a given area. So, for example, the model department, we want to really knock out the non-value added, or we think there may be a lot of non-value added work. It just seems to take a lot of time, a lot of effort to get anything through our model department. So the problem in this case is we think our problem is in the model department, so we want to set up a theme that addresses that. And so our theme is to focus on a weakness. And the reason we focus on weaknesses, because a lot of people are uncomfortable with that. They feel that that's really negative. Well, think of the chain analogy. So if we have a chain and we focus on the strongest link, then we're only as good as our weakest link. So our philosophy is to focus on the weakest link, and that's how we make the whole stronger. We want to thoroughly explore the problem. And that's something if you know, in the case of the doctor that says, give me take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning, they weren't exploring the problem. And a lot of times we don't do that either. So we really want to explore the problem. We want to carefully select the theme. So just at this stage, you know, we've identified a problem area, and before we jump to solutions and before we come up with ideas on how to fix this, it's really spending time to understand the problem. And so I typically would do a field trip, or let's go back to that department, or let's really get in and let's understand it. Let's map it. There's a number of things we can do. So even at this early stage, we want to really understand what the problem is that we're focusing on. All right, and then we're going to develop the theme. And here's the example below: is the theme should be very concise, very succinct. And the purpose of the theme statement is to get everybody on board with and understanding the problem that we're going to solve. It's amazing how we can all think differently, and even though I may think we're all working on the same thing, we're not. And so it's really of value to come up with just a simple, clear statement on here's what we're going to do. So in this case, the example is reduce non-value-added work in the model department 30% by a set date. All right, so now everybody understands here's what we're going to go after. Okay, so the theme, and by the way, as I talk through this, I'm going to show you the extent to which you can take this process. Now, if you have some simple problem, you don't need to go through all of this. And we'll talk about this a little bit further. So don't think, holy smokes, I thought you said this is simple. It really is. Going through this stuff is relatively simple. But as you get a really tough problem, you need to do more of these activities that I'm pointing out. Okay. But if you could, even on something simple, if you could say, okay, what is it we're going after? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And then state it in a form of we're getting rid of a weakness, we're getting rid of an issue. All right. And again, and especially if you have more than yourself working on it. If there's multiple people, there's value in making sure it's clear to everybody what you're working on. So if you could take a couple of moments and think about a key problem that you have in your lab, something that's been giving you headaches or problems. Maybe it's from a customer, maybe it's internal. Think about that. What is a problem that you would like to address in your company? And then see if you can convert that to a theme statement. Write that something like we saw in the previous slide. Some kind of reduce, some problem, some defect, some issue, some waste. By how much? And I put 30% there. Normally they recommend something between 20 and 50%. If you say, well, I want to improve it by 5%, well, ho-hum, that's not too meaty. And if you say, well, I want to eliminate it completely, or I want to do 100%, that may be too much. So usually if we can make a good 25 to 50% reduction in a problem or an issue or a defect, that's a good thing. Now, there are a lot of times where we see that we'll set something like 25 or 30% and actually do 80 or 90%. But sometimes it's overwhelming if you set that up front. So if you could do a reduce whatever your problem is by an amount and a date that you'd like to achieve that. Okay, and that helps the team. Now they can see what we're after. Okay, that was the theme. Step 2 is collect data and analysis. And this is such an important step, and one that we just often don't do. A problem pops up, our normal mode, and I'm as guilty as anybody, is to jump to solutions. But that's one of the worst things you can do. Now, if it's something really little and it's low risk, if you don't solve it, it's not important, then I guess that's okay. But if you really want to solve something, you really need to collect data. Because if you don't have data, how do you know you have a problem? An example would be in our idea suggestion system, somebody had a suggestion. They said, well, we should make these changes in production because this may happen. And I said, well, does it ever happen? Well, I don't know. And it's like, well, before we invest thousands of dollars and I don't know how much labor to implement something, it'd be nice to know whether or not we have a problem. Well, the only way we can really do that is if we have data. So in that case, we went back, we looked at, under the cases that this person had identified, is there any data that supports there was a problem? and there wasn't. So we audited it, and we make sure, yes, we're following our process as we say, but there was no data that said that there's a problem that we should move forward. So data collection is very important. You really need it in order to go after a problem. So what we want to do is as much as possible, define our data collection process. So what all data can we collect that fits our theme? Again, we're going to stay focused on our theme. Multivariable data if possible, and that means non-multivariable would be yes, no, on, off. If we can, we want to know the degree of a problem or an issue. Okay, something happens 20% of the time, or does it happen 80% of the time? That's multivariable versus all or nothing. We want to analyze the data, and we want to, graph it out, and nothing fancy. I mean, if you're an expert on Excel, great, but otherwise just draw it out. That's fine. And so we want to look at, visualize if we can, the data, and from that draw logical conclusions based on facts, and then focus on the value, the vital few. And we want to use standard tools, and let me step ahead to that. So for example, on data collection, on the upper left, we have the check sheet. This can be something really simple. What data we want to collect? So in the model department, we could identify the different steps, and maybe we want to look at what is the time for each step, or what are the, what problems, where do we see defects in each step? So we can kind of start quantifying by category or by area, by operator, or there's a number of different facets that you can look at to collect the data. And this is really neat because a check sheet like this, as you can see, you're actually getting kind of a quantitative measure while you're collecting the data of where your problem areas are. So hopefully you see that, hey, whatever B is, that's happening the most, and that's probably our problem. And it's really neat. One of the first times I used a check sheet with an improvement team at Whitmix, it was really kind of a complex problem, so we set up the check sheets. But as soon as we started filling in the data, it's like, dang, we saw where the problem was. It's amazing how that visual really helps. Other common tools in the data are the Pareto diagram, and really, if you're not familiar with it, all we're doing is ordering the level that we found from our check sheet. So in that Pareto diagram, B would be that number 1, let's see, E would be the number 2, A the number 3, and so on. And that's just a way of keeping our focus on the most important thing. A lot of times we go after the secondary or tertiary items where we really want to be focused on the number 1 issue and take care of that. The other thing we're going to talk about today is a cause and effect diagram, also known as an Ishikawa diagram or a fishbone. And this is a way of really driving down. So we would identify a problem, whatever B is, would be why do we have that problem? Okay, what are the causes? We look at material, we look at people, we look at equipment, etc., and look at, okay, what is really contributing to that problem? So those are a couple of common ones. Other tools we may use are a flow chart. But that's really the basic tools that we're going to use to really try and quantify what our problem is and where our problem areas are. So thinking back in your operation and the problem that you identified just a bit ago, what data could you collect? What if you set up a check sheet? What could you capture? Could you capture by employee? Could you capture by shift, by department, by function, by piece of equipment, by whatever variable that you can think of out there? It's really cheap to spread this out and capture all you can at this point. And so think of that. What data could you capture? Okay. So next is causal analysis. So we've captured enough data to point us in a direction. And so, but it may be still fairly high level, and it may be something like, well, the problem is in the model department. And I'm picking on the model department because you folks that work in the model department are used to it. You're always getting picked on. Just where I probably have more experience because of making the gypsum products. And it's also the beginning of the process. So anything that happens in the model department is going to get carried throughout. So I guess that's why we always pick on the model department. But let's say the problem in the model department was the work coming out just isn't consistent. We're not getting consistent cases coming out of the model department. And that's what we had identified when we collected our data, is that the high-level problem, the B as in the little bar that we saw before, was that models aren't consistent. And so we can use the fishbone diagram to ask why. What is causing that? And we're going to break that into categories. They used to be the 4 M's: materials, manpower, methods, and machinery. And we kind of base it off that and drive down and look at what within that area can cause it. You know, maybe it's a piece of equipment that we have is intermittent, or maybe in our data we said, you know, it was the model department, but it looks like it only happens on Mondays. So for whatever reason, on Mondays, we're getting variable cases coming out of the model department. Well, then as we look at it, we may see, as we explore our process and ask the whys, we may find out it's something like, well, that's when we get all of our work over the weekend and we're overloaded, and so we're doing things by multiple different ways, or we bring in equipment we don't normally use, or we're using people that we don't normally use. So we're driving down what is really causing that problem. And here's an example of I always call it a fishbone diagram, but I guess the proper name is cause and effect diagram. Here's an example of late pizza deliveries on Fridays and Saturdays. And so they have the categories are people, machinery, equipment, methods, and materials. And so each of those, they would say, okay, well, you know, why do we have this problem? Well, under people, what could people could do to contribute to that? Well, people don't show up. Okay, why don't people show up? Well, we don't have teamwork. And why don't we have teamwork? No training. Okay, well, why else don't people show up? Well, we have high turnover. Why is that? Low pay. And then you go around and normally you're doing this as a team and you're getting everybody's input on what are the causes here. And so another machinery, let's see, what's an example here? Ovens too small. Well, why are ovens too small? Well, we have no capacity. Why does that cause the problem? We have no capacity for peak periods. Okay, any other issue with ovens too small? Well, we have poor use of space. Why? High turnover, poor training. Anyway, we would go through, and again, this is brainstorming, so we don't know that any of these are necessarily right or wrong, but it's stated. These are people's thoughts. But now we start looking at these lower level, and we try and look at, are there any commonalities here? And so, you know, when we see stuff like no training, high turnover, you know, it may start telling us that, you know, we may have some key problems here within the organization. So, and it may not just be the people. You know, why do we have high turnover? I didn't get into there, but it may be the work environment. There may be other things we need to look at. But the key here is that in order to solve why we're getting late pizzas, in this case on Friday and Saturdays, or in my example of why we're having problems coming out of the model department on Mondays, is we really need to drive down and look at what's causing that. All right? So the fishbone is really a key. And you can do it really simple too. You know, I've done it where I have a problem. To be honest, even something relatively simple and not even with a team, this is just me. I'll write down what the problem is. I'll try and convert it into a theme. Okay, what does I want to reduce, and how much and by when, and what data can I collect, and you know, maybe I go backwards and collect data and enough to understand quantitatively what's going on there, and plot it if necessary. But then I'll do a real quick cause and effect and say, okay, what's really causing that, and really try and drop down. And even if you don't formally do a fishbone, if you engage the idea, is that, okay, there's a problem, but let's look at what's causing it. Back to the doctor, you know, he's really trying to drive down, in the case of the doctor and the patient that wasn't feeling well, he's really trying to drive down and understand what's causing it. Because if you can't treat the cause, you're still going to have the problem. Okay, so the same thing. Even if you don't formally do a cause and effect diagram, at least mentally, if you can think of, you know, when do I need to ask why? Why is this happening? Why is this happening? And drive down. Okay, step 4. Now that we know our root cause, we know what's causing our problem. So let's go back to my example of the model department having a higher level of defects coming out on Monday, and we identified that that's where we have our heaviest load, and we just, we use other people, we bring in other people to help us, and so they're not as well trained, and so our issue is training. So what we want to do is make sure that we have, our solution is to make sure anybody that works in the model department is fully trained. Okay, so now we have a solution that we want. Okay, so now we have a problem. Our problem is training. And so how do we go about resolving that? I think I got ahead of myself here. So what we wanted, okay, we identify, let me back up. We focus on the root cause, and in our case it was training. So we want to focus on a solution that we can implement. Now, if the solution is that, well, we're only going to hire college grads that work in the model department, that may not work, okay? We may not be able to implement that. We may not be able to get buy-in that we can do that. Or if the solution is for some other department to do things differently, that may not happen, okay? So we want to start with looking at solutions that we can implement ourselves. The other is don't try and fix everything at once, and this is a toughie. A lot of times we see, wow, okay, yeah, our key problem here was training, but here's another one, here's another problem, here's another, let's go after those. Well, the problem is if you go and fix 3 or 4 things, you don't really know which one caused it, and it may be that you didn't really solve it. So it's easier, it's cleaner if you can go one at a time. And so pick what you think is the most important and come up with your solution and resolve that one. Try and involve all those that will be affected. So if you think the solution or the problem area and where you want to pull your solutions from covers a number of people, even if they weren't on the original team, bring them in now. An example would be we had a problem that was back in our packaging area, and we thought the main problem centered around maintenance and setup. And so we made sure we had the maintenance folks part of our solutions gathering process. And then on solutions, if it's something easy, just do it. But if the solution is going to cost a lot or require a lot of resources, you may want to test it out, because so far we're just going on best estimates, best guesses. I mean, we have data that shows where we have a problem, but we're just brainstorming right now on solutions. And so if it's something big, before you implement the solution, you may want to run a pilot or an experiment. Okay, so when we get down to selecting a solution, we try and do this little matrix. And the reason we do is we want to get multiple solutions out there. And so, for example, if we said, well, the issue in the model department was we're using untrained people to pour up during our busy periods. What are our solutions there? Well, the obvious is we need to train everybody that works in the model department. And that may be the best solution, but sometimes the most obvious solution isn't the best solution. And so we want to challenge people, and we want to come up with several ideas. And so, for example, I'm sure number one would be we're going to put together a training program or a qualification program for anybody that works in the model department. But there may be some other ideas. And we even say silly ideas are okay at this stage. Because let me throw out, here's an example. When we do this team training at Whitmix, we use a case study, and that case study is about a restaurant. And in their case, their biggest problem was they were getting customer complaints, and when they collected their data and after they did their fishbone, they identified that the biggest problem was that Friday at lunchtime. So Friday at lunchtime is where they were getting their biggest problem. So under their, and why, and in their root cause analysis, they said, well, not enough wait people. So when they got to this stage, the obvious solution is, well, we need more wait people for lunch on Fridays. Well, okay, that's the most obvious, but there may be other solutions. And if you think about it, some restaurants have come up with a clever way of dealing with that Friday lunch rush, and that is to put in a buffet. So And that only comes if you're stretching yourself, ideas like that. So it may be that the best idea is something different like that, something unique or whatever. And so we want to make sure everybody has a chance, because what we're going to do, we're going to come up with different ideas, even if some of them are silly, because then we're going to grade them. All right, and the silly ones, the ones that really won't work, are going to fall out, and we'll end up with the best. All right, so on our grading, we're going to grade from either 3 or 5 as our high, 2 or 3 as our medium, and 1 as our low. Or you may, let me come back to that. So we're going to grade these high, medium, and low. And first is we're going to look at effectiveness. So if our number 1 was we're going to set up a training program, excuse me, feasibility. So if we're going to set up a training program, how feasible is that? Well, that's probably something we can do pretty easily. If it is, if it's a no-brainer, yeah, it's something we can do easy. It's not going to cost a lot. We can do it with internal resources. Then I give it a 3. If for whatever reason we say, well, no, we're going to have to bring in somebody from the outside, we're going to have to go to the owner and get permission or get resources to pay for this, then it may not be so easy, and it may be a 2 or a 1. Okay, so feasibility is how easy is it to implement this solution. And then there's effectiveness, and that is how effective is this solution at solving our root cause. And sometimes, if we're just kind of brainstorming, some of these really aren't effective. So what we want to do is look at the feasibility as we go through and we grade these. We want to look at the feasibility and effectiveness and pick the best. Now, a lot of companies, including Whitmix, we weight the effectiveness more, because if something really is going to solve that problem, even if it's not easy to do, we may still want to do it. Okay? So a lot of times we'll give this a 2x. So on our score here, then if this was a 3, we may convert that to a 6, and then this is 3, multiply them out and get our scoring. So again, we want to pick the best one. But we also want that exercise of looking at what are other ways of solving this problem, just to make sure we've gone that route. And again, this is for the big case, the most complex case. If you're working on something simple, you don't need to do this. But just be aware that this tool exists. And in fact, at any point that you've been going through this process, if the solution jumps out at you and it's like, oh gosh, knock on the head, why didn't we see that? It's so obvious, then go right to that. Go ahead and implement it. But if the solution, if it's still iffy, you really want to follow this process, all right? So now we've identified multiple solutions, we've graded them, we've picked our best, the one that we think is going to really solve our problem. Then we need to plan how we're going to roll that out, how we're going to implement it, how we're going to execute. And what we use is 4 W's and 1 H. And so we'll identify, so if in the example of we're going to set up a training qualification plan for anybody that works in the model department, well, what steps? Well, we need to develop our procedures. Here are the instructions that the person would work to, or training aids, or whatever you want to call it. What is it that we need to be able to describe what they need to do. We need to be able to put together our training curricula. We need to make sure we have trainers identified. We need to run the classes. We need to have a system in place so as we get new people that we're getting them qualified. So we identify what are all the what's in order to make that solution happen. And then typically I kind of jump and say, okay, who's going to do that? So we assign somebody responsible, and they may not do all of it, but they're responsible to make sure it happens. When are we going to have that done by? Okay, what's our target date? Where, and a lot of times that's here, but there may be some things you have to go outside or to other places. And then the how, and that is there may be detail below the item. And okay, now how do we set up that training plan? And you may have more specific data under that. We actually use this format a lot just for our minutes from a group meeting. If we have a team that's working on something, we don't capture a lot of the discussion. What we capture are the action items. And so as a result of that team meeting, what are we going to do? We're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do that, we're going to do that. Who's going to make sure it gets done? So-and-so, so-and-so. When's it going to be done by? Okay, where are you going to do this? Well, I've got to go out to such and such dental lab and work with them. Okay, and exactly how are we going to get this done? Well, here are the steps I'm going to go through. So we use that a lot as capturing just team minutes because it's very action-oriented. So anyway, step 4, we're going to, how do we implement our solution? And you're going to see at the end here, I'm going to talk about another tool called the 9-step do it. And if it was a big project that you're implementing at this point, something really big, then you could go to that tool as well. All right, step 5, evaluation of effects. Now, if we didn't measure anything before, if we didn't collect any data, how are we going to know that we fixed it? So this is so key. This validates why it's so important to collect data up front. Because in the end, how do we know what we did was good? Because we really want to be able to confirm the improvement before and after. So if we had no data from the beginning, then we will have no data at the end. And actually, we've had teams that they did a very poor job at data collection up front, and they implemented something, and then they set up a data collection system. So we could see where they were at afterwards, but we had no idea if it was an improvement or not because we didn't know where they were before. So again, that data collection is important. Think of keeping score, playing a game, playing sports, whatever, cards. How do you keep track of who's winning? Or you've got to keep score. And so to do that, you've got to be able to collect data on and measure your performance. And so it's so critical to be able to do that up front. And again, at this stage, because if you don't know if you improved or not. And the other is that this evaluate all subsequent effects is you may have improved what you're after and really just shifted that problem somewhere else. So I always think of productivity, cycle time, and quality. And usually you can improve one or the others by sacrificing one of them. Okay, so usually if you're willing to sacrifice quality, you can improve productivity or you can improve cycle time. Well, you don't want to do that. You want a solution that improves all of them. So you want to make sure that you didn't shift your problem. And the other is measure improvement gains over time. It's amazing how often we get everybody excited. We're part of this team. We make a great improvement. We identified the problem. We got everything. Got it implemented, and we've shown that, wow, look, this is really showing great results. And a month later, we're back to where we were. And it's kind of, I think of it as the spring effect. You know, we're all excited and the spring pulls out, but for whatever reason, we pull back. And we'll hit on that again, but if we can, it's nice to be able to measure the gain over time to see if it sticks. Now, one way that we can help make it stick is through standardization. And this is, if you have work instructions and standards, this is the time where you would update those. You would conduct your training and make sure that people are on board. If you don't have work instructions or training systems in place, it's really hard to make it stick. Okay, so and part of Lean is standardization and having standards in place. And so you know, and everything I've been talking about really fits with Lean. This all is well within the Lean philosophy because these tools can be used to go after waste, and that's the key part of Lean. But also with Lean is having standards. And so this is your chance to lock in your new standard and try and make the improvement stick. 7 is analyze your strengths and weaknesses. And I'll hit on this briefly. This is a nice to, especially early on in your improvement process or your continuous improvement activities, is to reflect at the end, how did we do? You know, what could we do better? And so this is just a reflection step to look at how can we do better next time. Okay, so again, it sounds like, well, this doesn't sound so simple. It really is. If you do it, each of these steps really is relatively simple. And if it's not a big enough problem to warrant going through all these steps, then that's fine. That's fine. But think of the PlanDoCheckAct. Are you giving, when a problem pops up, are you giving it enough thought? Are you giving it enough focus? Are you getting involved enough to really help make sure that you understand it and the people do, and that you really understand what's going on there? And coming up with a plan that, or a solution that you really think has merit. Getting that implemented, and then most importantly, really, is checking. Did it work? You know, the take 2 aspirin, call me in the morning is not effective. And, you know, if we went to a doctor and got that response, again, that wouldn't be good. And if we're doing that to our folks, then it's not good. And if we're teaching them that that's okay, then we're never going to solve problems. So what we want to do, especially as leaders, is walk the talk here. We want to make sure that when a problem comes up, we show that we're going to get in there, we're going to really focus on it, we're going to really try and understand what's going on, and then come up with what we think are real valid solutions to take care of it. We're going to do them, and then we're going to follow up and check. And a comment I'd like to make here is that the quality of that solution, if you're not going to check, then you have to have the perfect solution. Well, nobody has a perfect solution. But if you have a good solution and you're going to check, then let's try the good one and check, because if it doesn't work, we can just run back and try another one. And we can do that quickly. But the most important thing, again, is that we're checking. We're verifying that what we did was effective. And then act. We're responding to the result of that check step. And so, again, even if you don't go through the 7 steps, is if you could incorporate the concept of plan, do, check, act in all of your problem-solving activities, you'll see that gets you way ahead. All right? Well, the other thing we can do with this concept is great for going after weaknesses or problems, but we can also use it to help us more effectively implement an initiative. And so, for example, you'll see a rapid version of this that we use a lot on little things, but we've used this on really big things. When we acquired our furnace division in Texas 12 years ago, we used this tool to plan that move and the integration up here in Louisville. We acquired Gelris here recently. We did the same thing. So it's a very powerful tool that really helps you get your arms around an initiative and making sure that you're doing everything right. So similar to the problem solving, it's based on the plan, do, check, act. And as you can see, the biggest part, again, is your planning. You're spending most of your time in that planning stage, or a lot of your time, depending on the project, I guess. On that planning stage, really looking at making sure we cover all of our bases before we jump in and start executing. And then we'll go to these in a little more detail. So here, this was a nice little diagram that I thought really helped explain it. So step 1 is project. Again, is defining it, making sure everybody understands here's what we're working on, here's the scope. Step 2.1, why? You can do this or not, but we usually do, and it just gets everybody on board. Why is this project important? Another thing we may do at this point is what are the challenges or obstacles we may run into on this project, so we have those, know those up front going into it. So we've defined here's what we're going to do, here's why we think it's important to do it, and then step 2.2 is what are our milestones? What are those 5 to 8 key things that have to be accomplished in order to make this project happen? And so the first one is just here's where we're at right now. We don't have whatever, or it's in another state, or here's our current state anyway. And then here's our final where we want to be. What are those high-level milestones that we have to accomplish in order to get there? All right? So now we have a good feel for, okay, here's what's ahead of us. Here's the big things we have to do. Step 3, data again. What are our measures? What are our measures of success? And it may be dates, but if it's only dates, you're missing something. Why are we doing this if it's a lot of our activities are, well, it should improve an operation. Well, if it improves an operation, what's the measure of that? So we want to make sure we capture that. Constraints, and this is really important. I was assigned a project by my boss, who's the president, and I got into it, and we came up with, here's our plan, here's our milestones, here's everything we need to do, and presented to him, and he goes, well, no, you can only spend X number of dollars, and I was above that. And so I thought, well, it sure would have been nice to know that back here, that here are my limitations. So the constraints are manpower. Hey, we can only do this. We're not going to offer any overtime. We can only do this on one shift, or you can only have these 2 people to work with you on this. Methods, machines, materials. What are the constraints? We should have financial here as well. That that you need to work within? What are the rules that you need to work within as you're looking at your plan? All right. Now, so we know our milestones. Well, for each milestone is how do we achieve that milestone? And alternatives, what they're getting at here is that, well, there may be various ways to achieve any given milestone. And what we want to do is brainstorm and identify, well, what are the different ways we can get there, and then pick the best. All right, so we've looked at moldables. We're looking at, well, there's different ways we can do this milestone, different ways we can do that one. And then we've gone back and said, well, here's the best. And so now they're going to be part of our plan. But we're also, okay, so now we know here are all the steps we need to go through, even low-level steps, in order to make this happen. Well, we want to do one other exercise, and that is, again, what obstacles? Okay, here's our plan. What could we run into? So to that start, that was some activity that needed to be accomplished in order to make this milestone, to achieve this milestone. And what are the obstacles? Well, we need so-and-so involved, or, you know, we're going to need a piece of equipment for that. And so looking at those obstacles and then coming up with our plan, how do we address those obstacles? And then all of that rolls into our major plan. All right, you can use the 4 W's and H's, or this is kind of a Gantt format. So now we have our plan. We start executing, and as we're executing, we look at our results. And depending on what you're implementing, if it's something that's only going to happen once and never again, then standardization probably isn't apropos. But for example, when we moved a production division here, standardization was key. We need to make sure that we're providing the same quality here that they did at the other plant. And so there was a lot of work that went on standardization, making sure we had standards and work instructions, and, you know, here's how we do this new improved process that we've just implemented here. And similar to the 7th step is on the 9th step is this reflection where, okay, how did we do? What could we do better? What could we do differently? And we also have, for the rapid, you see up here, this is what we probably use the most. So we print out this on a large sheet of paper, and we go through and just write on this. Nothing that formal or that fancy. We'll write the project, and again, as clear and concise as we can. We're going to put this in place by this date, all right? Something that's simple. Again, why is it important? We may write on the back, do the brainstorming on the back. Start with, here's our current state, here's our final state, list the milestones in between. What's our metrics for success? How do we know we're doing right? The alternatives for each of the milestones, go ahead and list those out. Any obstacles with their countermeasures, come up with our detailed plan. As you can see here, it's really the what, who, and when. All right, then we're going to evaluate our steps, our results, and standardize where it's as applicable, and then a review and reflection. We use this an awful lot. We use it a lot within the problem solving as well as part of our, here's how we're going to implement a solution. And if you can get a copy of this, or in any way you can get a copy of this, you're welcome to use this. Okay, so what I'd like to do is kind of wrap up now, and the take home. If you got nothing else out of this, is the sense that somebody has to lead your problem solving, your lean, your continuous improvement. It doesn't just happen. All right, so somebody has to lead it. And I've learned that the hard way. I've tried to delegate a lot of things, and you can't, it's hard to delegate something new, something different. As a leader, sometimes you need to just get out there and lead the way in person and show the folks that you work with how to make it happen and how to make it work. The other is try something. Even if you don't do the full 7-step or the full 9-step, is try and apply the PlanDoCheckAct concept to the next problem you work on. Next time somebody hits you with a problem is spend just a little time thinking about it, trying to really understand it and really study that problem before you go off to a solution. And then also really looking at, is there a way I can measure whether or not we were effective here? All right. Spending time understanding the issues before jumping to solutions. And again, I think it's okay for managers to jump in. Some say, well, then I'm usurping somebody else's responsibility and authority. Well, in time, maybe that's true, but if this is new, if the person that is responsible for the problem area really doesn't know the tools and they haven't been trained, I think it's okay for managers to get in there, or leaders to get in there and help them and coach them and work with them to get the problem solved. The other is follow up and verify results. Again, we don't know if we made an improvement if we can't verify the results. And what I think works here is getting people involved, and if you can do that, they have a lot of knowledge, they have a lot of expertise, and most people really enjoy helping out. Okay, so if this is my take home, so hopefully you get something out of this. Now we're open to questions.
All right, so this time we're going to open the floor to questions. Remember, you can type them on the right-hand side of your computer in that questions box. We do have a couple ones that you might have already answered, but you did show a lot of worksheets in the presentation. Where can people get copies of those? Is that something they can request from us?
Now, we can post this. I can post the slides somewhere if that's okay, Sarah.
Yeah, if anybody would like a copy of the presentation, they can email us at webinar@whitmix.com, and we can send it out to you. All right, and our next question is, in organizations where employees feel that everything is going really well, how does management get them on the same page in incorporating some of these techniques into their lab or office?
That's an excellent question. And I'd read something a while back, and it may have been on that book on Ideas Are Free and getting people involved on idea systems. Because a lot of times the folks down at the workbench, let's say, they're not aware of all the turmoil and all that's going on. And what we need to do is share that sense of, here's the that there is this sense of urgency, that there is this problem. And one of the things we've done at Whitmix is, we've been really lucky in that we're almost 100 years old. Our business model has really been around the lost wax investment casting process, and that's been stable for all that time. But we know our world's changing, but our folks aren't, they're used to doing what we've been doing. And so we put on a management program and said, hey, here's the world, here's what's changing, and we go into depth on CAD/CAM, and we go into offshore and what impact that has and our vision of the future. And so I'd read something about, never let any good crisis go unutilized or unwarranted. So if you can, if the reality is that you don't have any problems, that everything is great, you're making all the money you want to make, and everything's great, then you really don't even need to do this. But I'm guessing you're doing this because there are some problems, and you've got to share that crisis or that problem with the employees, because otherwise, you're right. If they don't feel there's anything, or if you can't create that sense of emergency or crises, then it's going to be hard to get them involved. So where you can, try and create that, because I think it's real. At least it is for us.
All right, those are the only two questions that came in. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and as a reminder, we will be sending out an email with information on how to obtain that CE credit. So you should get that within the next 24, 48 hours. Oh, we just had another question come in. Can we get a list of the books you suggest that show these tools, like the fishbone diagram? Do you have a list of books, Brian?
Let me look. A lot of what we had, we were members of an organization called Center for Quality of Management. And so a lot of what we had was copyrighted and proprietary to them. But I have other references. I'll put together a reference list of materials that would support what I covered today.
All right, perfect. And for everybody listening, I'll make sure to include that in the email that is sent out. So I guess at this time, again, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at webinar@whitmix.com. And we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.